Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today we got to talk about some exploding pagers and possibly walkie-talkies. Now you might be like, whoa, your channel's Some Ordinary Gamers, why are you talking about this? Pretty politically charged topic, Muta. But today's video is kind of about cybersecurity, about hacking, and about being careful with internet or network connected devices. Now, the reason I'm kind of talking about this is a little bit twofold. One, I kind of want to demystify a lot of misinformation that I'm seeing float around. It's one of the things where I like doing the research, I like bringing things forward to you, and I like showing you things to educate you. And the other reason is when I got family that sometimes asks me if a battery in a device can possibly blow up because of a hacker, then I gotta really make a video because this is seriously like a bit of misinformation that I want to absolutely nip in the butt because it is misinformation. So this whole story kind of begins out with this insane story of spycraft and explosions that basically was, in between Israel and Lebanon, a current conflict that is brewing between both sides. At the moment, that region is incredibly unstable at the moment, and obviously I'm just going to leave it right there because there's far more equipped channels than I to talk about the geopolitics of an area. But what had happened over here was apparently there was a story of exploding pagers. Pagers were just going off. And apparently it was something around like, I think 2,000 to 3,000 people that were injured. Around 9 people actually ended up dying. And basically the idea was these pagers were blowing up in like, the Hezbollah military, the members of that military who possessed these pagers ended up having them blow up on them. Now, there's footage of this stuff on the internet, and obviously, for the sake of YouTube's terms of services and my own mental health, I'm not really going to watch these on video, but I can explain that there is one very famous image of a supermarket where somebody's just going around shopping. There's obviously civilians in the area purchasing their food, and boom, around this one person's pocket goes an explosion. Pop! Boom! And that explosion, that person goes to the ground and, people are genuinely very confused at what happened. A pager ended up exploding in somebody's pants. And, at that distance, all right, it's going to cause some pretty serious damage. But of course, I was reading things like Israel hacks into personal communication devices and detonates them remotely. So when I was reading this, and this is where a bit of the misinformation kind of like spewed from, because people were wondering, was this actually a crazy hack? Could you jump into the lithium-ion batteries of a device and cause it to expend all of its energy at once, causing a very nasty explosion? So obviously, one of the things we're going to start off talking about is, if you ever go back in time a little bit to 2016, there was a very, very popular phone known as the Samsung Galaxy Note 7. Now, this is Samsung's like big phablet, like pretty much I think this is effectively Samsung's main phone now. Like it's become the actual main product. But yeah, this was like their big brand phone where like the screen size was huge. You had the pen attached, very powerful device. One of the problems with this device, and something that came from Samsung's research, was that there were some batteries in this device that were manufactured improperly. So for instance, they show this lithium-ion battery structure with the negative tab, the positive tab, the separators, and the electrodes. But of course, this one battery that is inside most cellular devices, what they found was that there was a normal battery where negative electrodes were not deflected, but then there were abnormal batteries that they found in their research where things were deflected in the upper right corner of the battery. There were other factors, like electrodes, incorrectly located in a curve and not the planar area. All of these issues basically caused the device to, the batteries to effectively combust, explode, and cause pretty serious damage. And it was so bad that there were plenty of like locations where like they straight up said, please don't bring this phone into our buses, buildings, and especially planes. Like if you were flying around the time with this phone, there was absolutely a warning that you weren't allowed to bring this actually on board. Now to show you guys what a lithium battery fire looks like, a lithium-ion battery fire, this is a clip from a channel known as Click Away Computer, Phone and Network Repair, and they have shown an 11-second clip of them puncturing a battery, a lithium-ion battery. And if you've never seen this before, be prepared to be blown out. So there it is. They're poking the device. It sparks and it expands and the fire goes out and boom, it spreads like no tomorrow. That, ladies and gentlemen, if it were to go off in your fucking pants, you would absolutely lose your mind, okay? It would just be over. So yeah, if that was the case, then the videos that I've seen over the last few days on the internet would have been a lot different, okay? People would be physically fucking combusting and you wouldn't see that explosion that you would see from an explosive device. So this leads to another scenario. Yes, this was an actual hack, but it wasn't a hack in the sense that somebody could send a, piece of, code to your device. Like, it's not like somebody's going to send a text message to your phone and that text message might trip some, software in the actual device, the motherboard, that causes a lithium-ion battery to do what you just saw. Now, in reality, this is a hack similar to something we've seen in the past known as a supply chain attack. Now, on this channel, I've talked about supply chain attacks in the sense of something like SolarWinds, where a bad actor gets in somewhere in the production chain and plants something, right? And in that case, it was a piece of malware. In this case, it was actually, from what it seems, a general consensus of there being an explosive device. So now this began a bit of an investigation, okay? For a lot of individuals, they were looking at images being shared around Telegram as this was happening. And one of those images was this one right here, an exploded pager that had what appeared to be the words gold, certain model numbers, and through this information, through these shards of info, people had started to go back and see just who actually produced this. And one of those production devices one of those producers was Gold Apollo Company, okay? So these are the guys that made that specific pager. And because of all of these wild stories going around, they actually had to make this announcement. They said Gold Apollo established a long-term partnership with this group Bach Consulting, KFT, in Hungary, hereinafter referred to as Bach. According to the cooperation agreement, they authorized this one company to use their brand trademark for product sales in designated regions. But the design and responsibility of the products are solely the responsibility of Bach. So basically they're saying they never actually produced those devices that were blowing up. Regarding the AR924 pager model mentioned in this recent media report, we clarified that this model is produced and sold by Bach. Our company only provides the brand trademark authorization and they basically do nothing else in amongst that. So this is where people were kind of looking at who was responsible in the supply chain. So realistically, what had happened in this situation was the Israeli government or some wing out of their actual, military decided they were going to go somewhere in the supply chain, all right, whether it be the manufacturer, whether it be intercepting a shipment where they grabbed these devices and then they basically opened them up, planted a small, tiny trace amount of explosive, well, I wouldn't say trace amount, but enough to cause serious damage. So according to Sky News Arabia, apparently this was the actual explosive compound that could have been used, which is something known as PETN, also known as pentaerythritol tetranitrate, okay? And I'm sure I pronounced that wrong a little bit, but then again, I'm not a explosives expert, all right? That's not really my field of expertise. I know, looks may deceive, right? But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes down to stuff like this, yeah, these pagers contained a explosive amount that at some point was detonated, and people around this area had basically said that these devices were beeping shortly before they exploded. So yeah, now obviously, why would any military group use something like a pager, for instance? And the reason why somebody would use a one-way pager in this specific instance is that it actually is just a passive receiving device, meaning that it shouldn't really transmit. And because it doesn't transmit, tracking one of these devices is not necessarily, possible, okay? Just from an engineering standpoint. Now, if it was a two-way pager, sure, then it would actually give up some information. Now, obviously, even the Hungarian government decided to come in and say, hold on a minute, even that Bach organization was basically just a trading intermediary with no manufacturing or operational site in Hungary. Basically, this whole investigation right now is pretty much still to be decided, but at the end of the day, what is confirmed is a supply chain scenario. So at some point, a government entity got in, planted a PETN or whatever similar explosive and caused some pandemonium. And that's pretty much how these situations ended up going out. So is this all related to a piece of malware that can be sent a specific signal, a brown note that can be sent to any of these devices and somehow trip the lithium ion battery? No. It's clearly not a lithium ion battery, but it threw me down a rabbit hole of people experimenting with, messing around with voltages and charging scenarios and causing similar situations. So you might not have heard of this, but earlier, literally this year in February, there was a page from the University of Florida, a research paper involving something known as Volt Schemer. So if you actually read it, they basically say wireless charging is becoming an increasingly popular charging solution in portable electronic products, which is true. If you ever actually bought a smartphone recently that doesn't have wireless charging, you put it on a little, podium, a little, device, it charges the device wirelessly through induction. And you might notice things get pretty hot, and generally I don't wirelessly charge. I think it's pretty bad for your device. Just use a cable like God intended. But anyways, what they said was in their research, they identified new vulnerabilities in wireless charging systems, making them susceptible to intentional electromagnetic interference. These vulnerabilities facilitate a set of novel attack vectors, enabling adversaries to manipulate the charger and perform a series of attacks. So what they said was Volt Schemer, a set of innovative attacks, grant attackers control over commercial off-the-shelf wireless charges merely by modulating the voltage from the power supply. And these attacks represent the first of its kind by exploiting voltage noises from the power supply to manipulate wireless chargers without necessitating any malicious modifications to the chargers themselves. So for instance, when they evaluated things like a car key fob, right? Upon initiating power transfer to a key fob, the battery inside reached a critical temperature, and as a result, the key fob didn't merely overheat, instead it detonated and caused the disintegration of the device in an explosive display, which sounds pretty spooky, right? I mean, goddamn, it just blows up. Paper clips. The temperature exceeded 536 degrees Fahrenheit when heated, which can potentially damage or destroy important documents affixed by these clips. So USB drives. A high temperature caused significant damage to the USB drive and the memory chip, making the contained data unrecoverable. Solid-state drives found on laptops can be occasionally placed on the wireless pad. We find that our attack can overheat the controller and flash of SSDs in unrecoverable states, thus rendering it to suffer data loss. So yeah, it can be pretty bad if you're placing any of these devices on a, wireless Qi charging pad, which according to this paper, you probably wouldn't want to be doing, okay? Now, should you be worried about your wireless charging pad? I probably wouldn't worry too much. That paper in specific is kind of an abstract. It's a piece of research material out there, but generally speaking, there's a lot of governments, a lot of agencies out there that want to achieve the next generation of spycraft all the time. And what I've seen over here is a supply chain attack that pretty much would be in a James Bond or a Mission Impossible movie. It's that insane and outlandish. But when it comes to, government intervention using any form of supply chain attacks or malware, there's a whole rabbit hole to go down. Now, the thing about supply chain attacks is obviously this is a pretty extreme version where actual explosives are sort of injected into these commonplace devices. But again, a supply chain can be just as deadly or just as dangerous, if, for instance, medical equipment was tampered with somewhere down the road, right? Or any kind of equipment, whether components were, modified, whether malware is injected that could cause those, components, specifically in things like medical equipment, to stop working, or possibly inject more, or, alter an actual, person. I'm bringing up scenarios of a supply chain attack and things that, could unfortunately happen. In this case, it was a government, organization doing this, but it easily could have been, a actual, criminal enterprise, like a cartel. Anybody could actually do it. And I think more focus needs to be put on the manufacturing and distribution processes, because since SolarWinds, supply chain attacks have kind of risen, and it's one of those things that makes me question the security of really any manufacturing process. Again, I don't think stuff like this should ever be okay, because, if it's so, so I wouldn't say this was an easy thing to do. I'm sure this was a very difficult and coordinated supply chain attack, but the fact that it happens makes me question about general security. And that really should be something that every company, every country, every organization looks into going forward when working on any of these kind of devices, or, when distributing this kind of stuff. For me, the fearful thing is wondering if any of these things ever maybe touched a plane. I've seen footage of these things being unfortunately used in a public, civilian-ridden, environment. And that is very, very spooky, all right? Very scary stuff to see. But again, this is a situation where at least a massive government was involved, and it kind of leads the explanation of how this was possible. Because yes, criminals exist and criminals do bad things all the time, but criminals also don't have infinite resources like a country does. So, there are at least some silver linings to look at there. But this is ultimately a very scary thing that should make people a little bit, a little bit awoken about actual supply chain threats that exist every day. One actual hack that I can talk about is one that you've probably heard of, known as Stuxnet. So back in 2010, right? Back in, the early, back in 2010, really, this was discovered, and it was basically a computer worm that targeted supervisory control and data acquisition systems, and was actually responsible, or believed to be responsible, to damage the nuclear program in Iran. So this one visual diagram from Spectrum IEEE basically showcased how this worked, right? So Stuxnet basically enters a system via a USB stick and proceeds to infect every single machine running the Microsoft Windows operating system. And by brandishing a digital certificate that seems to show that it comes from a reliable company, the worm is able to evade detection systems. So kind of similar to something like myprot2.sys. Remember that Genshin Impact that kernel level driver, which was unfortunately used by actual criminals to bypass certain detections to run pieces of malware? Yeah, it was kind of similar in a way to that. So once, Stuxnet is placed into a system, it then checks whether a given machine is part of a targeted industrial control system made by Siemens. Or Simons. I don't think it would be Siemens. That's a growth. That wouldn't be a right name. Such systems are deployed in Iran to run high-speed centrifuges that help to enrich nuclear fuel. So they're effectively looking for, hey, does this network contain this specific device we want to hit? If not, then we shouldn't do anything. So if Stuxnet, effectively, compromises the system's logic controllers, right? Those specific devices, those specific Siemens centrifuges, they would exploit zero-day vulnerabilities, software weaknesses that nobody really knows of, okay? The only people that know of this are the ones that have researched, right? So you've got no antivirus solutions, no one that can help you, because it just never was discovered. So in the beginning, Stuxnet spies on the operations of a targeted system. Then it uses the information it's gathered to take control of these centrifuges, making them spin themselves to failure. So yeah, this is an actual piece of malware that is designed to destroy equipment, right? So, whereas there isn't any malware to necessarily explode a lithium-ion battery, and there's a lot of hardware safeguards in a device, so if you are genuinely worried that, something like this could happen to your device, I would say, probably just don't be in any military unit or any fucking terrorist group, and chances are you'll be fine, okay? You probably will be okay. But given that this was a supply chain attack, one thing that I do genuinely worry about is if something like a pager was brought onto an airplane. But to go back to the airplane bit, right, it makes me wonder just how some of these devices were able to evade things like detection. Now, assuming it even went to an airplane or even went through an airport, I would imagine that, these devices should have been detected by any airline, security group out there. But depending on how these things were placed in the supply chain, how they were hidden, maybe they could have gotten through, okay? Airport security isn't usually perfect, and in this situation, you have a nation state doing the job, so genuinely, the quality of the work is far excessive than if it was some random criminal operation. But this whole pager stuff reminds me of a pretty spooky scenario that goes all the way back to Vietnam. If you think this is the first time any government agency has ever tampered with the device to attack, their combatants, let me introduce you to something known as Project Eldest Son, okay? Now, Project Eldest Son was one of the oldest covert operations done by the United States Studies and Observation Group during the Vietnam War. So according to this, Wikipedia page right here, the project focuses on placement of exploding cartridges into supplies used by the Communist Combat Forces in Southeast Asia. So way back in the day, and this is a old school page about it, what they basically said was the cartridges that were used in Operation Eldest Son originally were reloaded with a powder similar to something known as PETN, high explosive. So again, we've seen that in this video alone, but sufficiently shock sensitive that an ordinary rifle primer would detonate it. This white powder, however, did not even faintly resemble gunpowder. So Ben Baker, their technical wizard, and how they describe as James Bond's Q in this scenario. Again, this is spycraft novels are based on fiction, but oftentimes in this genre, fiction is pretty much based off of fucking reality. Decided this powder might compromise the program if ever an enemy soldier pulled apart one of those rounds. So what they did was they obtained a substitute explosive that resembled it really closely, like actual gunpowder, and it could pass inspection unless, of course, like an actual ordnance expert ever opened it up and looked through. So what happened then was the CIA's Okinawa lab did a very good job of prying open actual ammo crates, unsealing the interior metal cans, and then repacking them. And so basically they would just literally have these like boxes of compromised ammo that looked effectively untampered. So then once the lab coats of the CIA labs were done, what happened was then the SOC teams, the Green Berets, anytime they found like an enemy ammo dump, they basically put this Eldest Son cartridge, these AK-47 rounds. And so what had happened was like inside these like ammo cases, it wasn't that every like single cartridge contained a piece of ammunition that could or could not work. It was literally, I believe, one cartridge in an entire ammo like box. So it really was playing fucking Russian roulette, quite literally, to see who had the explosive ammo. Now, was the goal necessarily in this case to assassinate some of these people? Absolutely not. The goal in this situation was to make the Viet Cong or any communist force actually question whether what they were using was safe. So because the actual enemy at the time noticed that, oh my God, this shit is exploding on us, these guns are blowing up on us, this ammo is blowing up, we're actually getting injured, people are afraid to actually use certain rounds. People are afraid in that group to use the guns that they had. And roughly, to go back to those pagers, that's kind of what you're seeing over here, right? Like nowadays, like literally in the last 24 hours, I'm reading about like walkie-talkies going off too. So genuinely, if, what's happening over here is the Israeli government has basically found a way to do psychological operations on, their combatants. And basically now every time they're putting any of these devices up to their heads, putting them around their crotch, they have to wonder, does it contain PETN? It's going to be pretty scary when, one day you wake up taking a call on your phone and you think nothing's going to go wrong. But now, when you're putting your phone up to your head, you might relive that scene quite literally from Law-Abiding Citizen where the bomb just goes off on the judge's head. That's a fear that now is invoked into the eyes of Israel's combatants, right? Or their enemies. And that's kind of one of the, overarching goals of this operation, right? But to go back to the beginning of this, I wanted to really cover if something like this could happen to any device or lithium-ion batteries. And the thing is, no, not in the way that, any of this. This is more of a situation of an actual supply chain attack where literal explosives were planted and then actual detonators within these devices were then tripped and these devices exploded. Now, obviously, going down this rabbit hole, if you really want to read about, multiple intelligence agencies and military operations of sabotaging ammo and devices to fuck with their enemy, that's going to be an entire rabbit hole that I think for some of you might be quite interesting, okay? I know for me it especially is. But when it comes to actual malware used to hack devices, right? It's not necessarily going to be in this situation. And when it comes to those specific batteries that people talk about, lithium-ion stuff, especially in those kind of pagers, the way that they explode, or the way that they combust rather, is quite different than what is being shared in a lot of these, videos around on the internet. But I wanted to talk about it because, yeah, it is something that I was seeing shared as a hack when it wasn't really a traditional, like, software level hack that people should genuinely be fearful of. I don't think you should be worried about it. It's okay to take a call. Don't be speaker phoning everything. I always hate it when I see it in public. So don't be responsible for that, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry. The internet is not as scary as you think. Every single device you hold in your hand is not as scary as you think. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like it, I am out.